Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 97 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is The Team Builder, an interview with Athena Brownson. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
Today's podcast guest is Athena Brownson. Athena Brownson is a 29-year-old real estate entrepreneur from Denver, Colorado. Ms. Brownson was a professional freestyle skier practicing over 300 days a year when she first started experiencing the symptoms of her tick disease. After finishing college in 2014, she developed severe anxiety and depression, GI issues, and extreme fatigue. She couldn't figure out why her health was continuing to deteriorate, and she started to have migraines and thyroid issues. Luckily, Ms. Brownson's boyfriend was a doctor who grew up on the East Coast. He knew there was an underlying cause to her symptoms and convinced her to get tested for Lyme disease. It came back positive. Ms. Brownson was treated for her Lyme disease with disulfiram, but she has had to take a break from her treatment to address parasites in her gut that are preventing the antibiotic from tackling her Lyme disease. Now, Ms. Brownson aims to help her fellow Lymies by reminding them that, although there may be bad days, you must give yourself grace and love throughout the Lyme disease journey. Hi, Athena, and welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Well, we're really blessed to have you as well. So, Athena, where are you today?
Today, I am in Denver, Colorado on this rainy morning in May. I can't believe it's May.
It's crazy that, well, the cool thing about May is it is Lyme Awareness Month, so May is a cool month for you Lymies.
The best month.
So what do you do in Colorado?
I am a real estate broker in my current life in Denver.
And are you a native of Colorado?
I am. I was born in Denver, grew up in Breckenridge. So I grew up in the mountains and I've been here pretty much ever since I was born.
So I understand you had a very athletic childhood. Tell us about your childhood.
Athletic, to say the least. So yes, I was raised in the mountains. My dad was a professional speed skier. So he was one of the first people to break 125 miles an hour on a pair of skis. So I always say I didn't have a chance. I started skiing at age 2, right when I could walk, basically. And my entire life was skiing. So I was on snow every single day, pretty much my entire childhood. When I wasn't skiing, I was in the gym, and it was my existence for sure. I went professional at skiing when I was 15 years old, actually, in Vermont, and I was a professional skier for a decade. So I was an athlete, to say the least.
So now, was it your goal to become a special skier or a professional skier, or did you have some other goals during your childhood?
Oh my gosh, I had every goal you could imagine. I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. I wanted to be, I definitely wanted to be a doctor for a very long time. And then I kind of moved more into the world of wanting to be an architect. And then I wanted to be a business. I always had really lofty goals. And I think that was because of skiing. Absolutely. So while it was my goal to be a professional skier, that was almost so innate that it bred other goals within me. And skiing taught me everything I know about life, for sure.
So what was your family life like during the course of your childhood? Was it a close family, or were you focused on, what kind of things were you focusing on, and what was your family life like?
Absolutely. So I am so close with my parents. I'm an only child. My mother had me when she was 42 years old. So, I was raised by older parents, and our family unit was very tight and still is to this day. They're in Breckenridge. I'm in Denver, so we're only an hour apart. I see them all the time, and I always say they're like the biggest rock stars I know, because they're in their 70s and they're still skiing almost every single day. My dad, now that the mountains have been shut down with coronavirus, he's been hiking mountains. He's 72 and hikes mountains every day to get turns in. So I'm really close with my family, and his athleticism, and my mom's an artist. They're this beautiful combination of complete opposites, and They really formed me into who I am today, and they're my support system for sure. So I'm very fortunate that in that manner.
What was your childhood like prior to going to, I'm sorry, what was your social life like prior to going to college?
Oh my goodness. So I mean, I was an athlete. So my life did revolve. I was very disciplined. But I spent all my time with other athletes. So I'd wake up with my team, and I'd go to the gym at 5 a.m. and get limber for the day. And then I'd be on the mountain from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I was the most energetic little nugget of a human you could imagine. I was surrounded by other professional skiers that were extremely driven and shared the same goals and discipline that I did. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a mountain community where schooling allowed for me to thrive in athletics as well. So I was on the mountain every day by 11 and finished classes for the day. So it was pretty much the perfect dream setup for a kid that wanted to be on snow all the time.
So let's talk about your decision to go to college. Why did you go to college, and where did you go to college?
Absolutely. School was kind of always an afterthought because of skiing for me. It just wasn't, it wasn't I was so into skiing that it was, of course I was going to go to college, but it wasn't as big of a thought in my life. And I decided to go to school when I think I was on my 7th knee surgery at that point. I've had nine ACLs, 9 knee surgeries. And I think at around number 7, I was only 20 years old at that time. And I thought it was time to go to school. So I had applied to colleges where I knew that I could still ski. And I ended up at CU Boulder, very close by, University of Colorado Boulder, where they have a great program that allowed me to go to school in the summer and the fall. And then I'd take the winter off and continue skiing. And I started off studying business and then architecture and art history and interior design. So like two complete opposites, which describe, I think complement each other really well. But I definitely was very focused on skiing at that point. And then when my skiing career slowly started to disappear because of injuries, skiers have a very early retirement age. So I retired pretty young, and went to school full time at CU Boulder, got my degree in art history and interior design with a minor in peace and conflict studies. And yeah, I loved it. I love Colorado, obviously.
So you knew at some point your skiing career was going to come to an end and you were going to have a post-skiing career. Mm-hmm. So what were your goals when you were pursuing your college career?
Yeah.
After you graduated from college, what was your second career going to be after professional skiing?
So I think I'd had like a little bit of a quarter life crisis. And I think this happens very commonly when you move from kind of ending one chapter of life and that chapter being so all encompassing, which was, my existence had been skiing. I was skiing 300 days a year for my entire life, pretty much. And the only reason that I stopped doing so was because of injury. So that was definitely a little bit of a quarter life crisis for me. It was, sure, I'm enjoying school and I love to learn, but I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do all of a sudden. So of course I finished college. I thought at the time I wanted to be an interior designer. I love art and art history, and that had been really what was drawing out the passion in me in college. I love architecture and I love learning about civilizations and the use of art and storytelling, which is why I got so excited about you when we were talking about the art of storytelling and creating narrative through space. So I knew that I really, really loved that. I think I was studying business because it was something that I thought I should do and it would be successful. But did I have any passion for business? Not necessarily. And when I thought about real estate, you know, my dad's a developer. So I did grow up in the world of real estate. But I really wanted nothing to do with it, honestly, when I graduated college. And that was because growing up in Breckenridge, I always said there was more real estate offices than t-shirt shops. So I kind of thought of it as a very kind of like used car salesman, like very overrun. I had no interest or desire. But what I didn't realize was that real estate was these spaces and a part of people's journey and story and life through space and through home and through shelter that is so pivotal in someone's life. And I didn't ever think of that.
Well, I want to come back to that, but let's walk back a little bit. So I'd like to talk to you about your career as a skier and the places skiing took you to, whether it be in Colorado or other places, and what type of contact did you have with the woods and wildlife?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take you through what a 12-month period would look like in my skiing, because that'll take you throughout the world in which I lived. So as a skier, you chase snow, obviously. So my summers I spent between Oregon, skiing on the glacier at Mount Hood, and then hiking in the forests in Oregon after skiing every day, and Whistler, British Columbia, where it was the same thing. So for about 3 months in the summer, I was skiing on the glacier in Oregon or Whistler, and then hiking in the woods right after it. And then I would go down to South America, chase winter, ski in Argentina, Chile, or New Zealand, depending on the year and where the best snow was. That would be August and September. October, mountains would start to open in Colorado, and I would come back and I would start skiing in Colorado from about October to January. Of course, I'm in the woods constantly, whether it was fully bundled up in clothing with skiing or, hiking in the woods afterward. I was in the forest nonstop. And then in January, I would head to Germany. I lived in Germany 3 or 4 months out of the year for a couple of years. Again, heavily wooded areas. And then I would head up to California. So Mammoth, California. And I'd ski there. So I was pretty much in the forest 360 days a year. And never once did I even know about ticks.
So let's talk about that. So I would assume as a professional skier, there was a great deal of training that you received, not only about the techniques associated with skiing, but how to keep yourself safe and what type of equipment you should use. Did any of that training ever include either tick awareness or tick protection tools?
I didn't even know that was a thing when I was growing up. No, absolutely not. So, health and wellness and well-being were pivotal in me being a successful skier. So whether that was through dryland training and being in the gym with Olympic lifting coaches, training at the Olympic Training Center here in Colorado Springs, I had nutritionists, doctors on staff, like every doctor you could kind of imagine that was around athletics, I was consulting with, and not once was even the word tick mentioned to me. Never.
So let's now talk about that. You had this whole team of professionals whose job it was to maximize your health and your capacity to succeed as a professional athlete.
Yeah.
And then you start to show what you now know to be the symptoms of your tick disease. When did those symptoms begin to present, and how did your team of professional health coaches react to your symptoms?
Honestly, they were so far that my symptoms now, I'm 29 years old, just for the record, so that we can kind of build my chronology. So I'm 29 now. And I look back and I put the pieces together. And I think it was around that quarter life crisis that I mentioned previously, that I started exhibiting these signs of Lyme. So at this point, I was pretty removed from this team of professionals that had helped me through, at that point, 9 knee surgeries, 2 ankle surgeries, and then at that moment, a broken neck. So I was pretty far removed from these trainers when I started to experience what I attribute now to being, my earliest symptoms of Lyme disease. So I really didn't have anyone there to help me put it together at that time. It was kind of just, I'm done skiing. What the heck am I going to do next?
Okay, so but I don't want to miss the early symptoms that you started to show. I do want to get to the point where you had your quarter life crisis, and I think that's a great way of describing it, because I think that's going to be a really important part of the story that you need to share. But let's walk back to the earliest symptoms. When did you first start showing the symptoms that you now, looking back, know were the symptoms of your tick disease?
Yeah, so I started to experience some really, I'm a very I've always been a pretty joyful person. And I started to really battle depression and anxiety when I was in college. And it kind of showed up out of nowhere. So I believe that's what you're referring to. Yeah. And then I started experiencing really bad GI issues. So all of a sudden, a healthy, young, athletic, driven individual was battling mental illness issues that weren't there prior. And to me, looking back when I was in it, of course, never in a million years would I have attributed it to something other than, oh, it's something I'm doing. But looking back now, it's pretty clear that was a pretty dramatic change in my existence and in my mind state and in my mental well-being. And I really attribute that to the onset of all of my symptoms with Lyme.
So now, how did your symptoms develop? You indicated that you had this, it looked like joint set of problems where you were having these mental health issues and you were also having your gut health issues at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is something that we probably want to explore together a little bit more. But then your symptoms started to develop in other ways. What other symptoms began to develop, which you now attribute to your tick disease?
Absolutely. Fatigue, the most brutal fatigue and brain fog, and lack of ability to really understand what was coming next in my life. It becomes kind of foggy. Like I look back, I try and remember what it was like to feel good and to be that athletic, young, really, really energetic individual. And I don't even remember what it's like to have that kind of energy. Now I pretty much rely on coffee and B vitamins, anything else to get me through. And I really, fatigue, depression, inability to keep food down, joint pain, lack of motivation. These are all what I, now attribute to Lyme. And they were so all encompassing that it kind of just became what my existence was. And it was battling, one thing separately at a time. And the inability, I didn't, now I put them together and I understand they were all part of one umbrella, but it was just one after another with battling stomach issues, and battling depression and anxiety and confusion and fatigue. And now I understand that, but at the time it was, why as a healthy young adult experiencing such an onslaught of health issues when I had never experienced anything like it before.
So you went from being this professional athlete who is a peak performer, who had a beautiful life, who now is starting to show these little symptoms that are having an impact on her capacity to perform at a high level.
Absolutely. So, throughout my career as a skier, I, was faced with injury. But for me, injury or any illness was something that had a start and a finish, because I was really, really good at rehab. So I was, even if I was getting injured, which I was consistently, I knew that if I followed A, B, C, and D, I was going to get better. So it was, I blow a knee, I get surgery, I follow this protocol to a T, and I get better. So for me, injury was always something that I had a starting point and an ending point. So I was a healthy, very disciplined, very driven, even when I was injured, or when I was encountering a battle or something I needed to overcome. And I thrived on that. I was good at rehabbing. I knew how to get myself better. I knew that I had the tools and the arsenal and the team around me to get through pretty much anything. But that's the hardest thing about what Lyme is it's so multifaceted that there's no straight journey. There's no starting and end point necessarily. And that's hard to wrap your mind around, especially from someone that was able to do that prior with any other issue I had.
All right, so this is different. You're having a very different experience. Even though you had been injured many, many times and you went through rehab many, many times, you now are having a very different experience. Talk to us about what impact this different health challenge was presenting to you. First, physically, what impact was it having on your capacity to perform as a skier at the high level you had been performing at before you were 22?
Yeah. Fatigue. The inability for my body to keep up started to present itself. So where at one point I was able to, pretty much keep myself energized and going through anything, I started to notice that my stamina and my ability to physically, even mentally, if I was able to keep going, physically, I started to lag. And for me, that was confusing and frustrating, because as a professional athlete, you look at your body you're a warrior, and that's why I am a warrior with Lyme 100%. But I've always been able to push my body through anything. So when I started to encounter these my body almost failed. I felt like it still feels in some ways like my body starts to fail me. And that was confusing and very frustrating, because my body has always been my tool for success. So all of a sudden, when mentally I'm exhausted and I can't get out of bed when I used to be able to get out of bed, or my muscles start to present too much soreness and joint pain and stiffness that I'm not able to perform, you can understand the mental ramifications of that for a young adult as well.
Well, I'd like you to talk about that. That's going to be my next set of questions. So now you're this gifted professional athlete who's had all kinds of success and a very gifted genetic physical foundation, which is now beginning to fail you at a stage in your life where you are probably believing you are going to be a peak performer.
100%.
How did that impact how you felt about yourself? What kind of doubts were creeping into your mind? What impact did that have in your ability to believe in yourself? And then I'd like you to talk about how that impacted you socially.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was confusing. Very, very confusing, because, I still look at, the family that I was, raised in, and the people that I was surrounded by were all performers as well. So when I started to see that I wasn't keeping up or necessarily didn't know what was next, didn't quite understand where my path was going, that was a huge mental hit. So going from, having these huge aspirations of, Olympic dreams and traveling the world and continually setting these performance goals for myself to kind of having to take a step back, and because my body wasn't keeping up and I wasn't able to perform at that level, was mentally depressing, and it was confusing for me. And it really, it's taken until the last couple of years to understand why that was happening and what my next purpose is. But I was lost for sure. Socially, I went from having a life with other skiers and other athletes to having to take a step back from that world, and that being a loss of identity as well. It was the ending of one chapter and the beginning of another. But of course, when you're in the middle of that, you don't understand where you are or what's the next step is. So for me, I had no idea what was coming next in my life. And I knew that I was, slowly losing sight of what my identity was, because at that time, my identity was Athena, the professional skier, not just Athena, the human being. I was very wrapped up in my identity as an athlete, and my social life was being an athlete as well. So it was a complete loss of identity, I would say.
Now, were you treating with any doctors at that time for either your gut health issues or your mental health issues that you now know were the onset of your Lyme disease?
Yeah. So when I graduated college, I think maybe it was my last year in college. I think it was right the year after I graduated. I finally went and saw a doctor for my mental health issues. So I'm a huge advocate for therapy. When I was in college, I went to a therapist. My professional, my coaches, everyone always was an advocate for, if you needed therapy, that was something you should do. So I was always talking to therapists through different injuries. But it got to the point where it was, okay, I need some more help, because this is, I couldn't get out of bed with depression and fatigue. I was experiencing panic attacks. I was extremely depressed. And I had no real sight for a way out of that. So I did go to a general practitioner along with a therapist, where they helped me to route through that with medication. And that actually, I do think that probably saved my life, because I was so depressed at the time.
Now, Athena, did any of the doctors that you were treating with at that time ever suggest to you that you should be tested for Lyme disease?
Not at that point, no. And the only person that I'd ever heard of with Lyme, and I didn't even know what Lyme was. There was another girl who was a professional skier that I remember hearing at one point in time that she had Lyme disease. But I'd never once had that come up until really the last 2 years of my life. Did the word Lyme was that something I encountered?
So when were you ultimately diagnosed with Lyme disease?
Oh, about a year ago. Yeah, last, what month is it? Quarantine brain. It's April. Or no, it's May. It's Lyme Disease Awareness Month. I was diagnosed last April, 2019.
Okay. So can you talk to us about how your symptoms developed, what doctors you saw, and what diagnosis you received between when you first started showing your symptoms at 22 and when you were ultimately diagnosed at 28?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was 25 years old, I fell skiing. I was post-professional career. I was skiing recreationally, being a showboat, and I fell really, really, really hard, and I broke my neck. Well, I say broke my neck. I tore a disc in my neck. And I tried to heal my neck non-surgically. I was so sick of having surgeries at this point. I was like, I'm just going to try and see if I can get it to heal itself. I did a series of cortisone shots. I did months and months of physical therapy, and finally decided it was time to get it fixed. So this breaking of my neck, also, I really started experiencing GI issues. So before I went in for neck surgery, I was having some GI issues, which I always attributed to, traveling. I traveled a lot. So I kind of thought that, I get stomach infections because of the travels that I've done, eating different things. Now I understand that was my immune system and my gut were just my weak points due to Lyme. But I always attributed my stomach issues to traveling. But when I broke my neck, I really started to have issues with my stomach. So I got my neck fixed. Best thing I ever did, for sure. But when I was recovering from my neck surgery, it was stomach infection after stomach infection after stomach infection. And we'd treat one and something else would come up, and treat another and something else would come up. And I was really fortunate because I had a doctor who was able to say, I think something bigger is going on here. There's no reason that you should be encountering stomach infection after stomach infection after stomach infection. I think there's something else going on here. And to me, I never in a million years would have guessed that there was something bigger going on with my body. I thought it was just, I've been exposed to a lot of different bacteria in my life, and unfortunately my gut's no good. So it's just something I'm going to have to deal with. But, and it's a funny story because this person is my significant other, and
That's really cool.
I was the first person to say, hey, I think we should test you for Lyme disease. And I was like, I've never been bit by a tick. What are you talking about? I thought it was foolish, honestly.
So let's walk that part of the story back. So you're in a relationship with someone who's a medical doctor. Could you share with us what his name is?
Yeah, Dr. Chad Pressmack.
And now you and Dr. Chad were in a social relationship before you began to share your symptoms with him, which you now have diagnosed as Lyme disease?
Yeah. So I was referred, our circles are very intertwined. His neighbor is my lender and my mentor. So he introduced us. One of my physical therapists worked with him. So she rehabbed me for multiple knees. So we had a lot of really, really, really close mutual friends. And when I started encountering all of these GI issues, he is a functional medicine practitioner and doctor as well. So he understood Western medicine with a functional medicine perspective, and he grew up in Connecticut and had Lyme disease as well. So when I started kind of saying, just amongst friends that I was encountering all of these stomach infections, he was the one to say, I think you should look into, getting tested for Lyme disease, because something bigger is going on here that I don't think you're aware of. And I wasn't aware of it. And I never in a million years, had he not really said that, I doubt to this day that I would have encountered a doctor that would have. So I was very fortunate there.
So let's explore that a little bit more. You had seen many doctors between the ages of 22 and 28, most of whom were not trained on the East Coast, most of whom did not grow up in Connecticut, and I'm sure most of whom did not have Lyme disease.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to note that all of those events had to come together for you to ultimately get a proper diagnosis, despite being in contact with a number of different doctors who had been treating your various symptoms over the course of about 6 years.
Oh, absolutely. Lyme was never something that I had heard of, that any doctor had brought up. It took a very, very, very strange and specific series of events for me to even hear the word Lyme. And, I very reluctantly tested for it, because I had never, growing up, I had never once heard to be aware of ticks. I had never once heard of Lyme disease. I had never understood what Lyme was. It was always, it was a word. It was a word, period. It was not a concept. It was not something that could be my reality until I got my test results back. Honestly, I thought it was completely crazy to even test for it, and no one had ever brought it up to me in my entire life.
So what type of test did you take, and what results did you receive once you took the tick disease test?
Yeah. What was the IGeneX? Yeah, I did the IGeneX test, and it was 7 out of 10 different. I had Lyme, babesiosis, and Bartonella were what I tested positive. And what? Tick-borne relapsing fever. I tested positive on all of those the first go around, which now I understand is not usually the case for a lot of people.
I do want to point out to our listeners that this is the first time we've interviewed someone that has had her doctor present who could download to us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Chad.
Can I have more coffee too, Dr. Chad? My hero.
He is. He's all of our heroes, but you're actually my hero as well. So let's talk about now what your new reality is, right? You've gone from identity shift to now a third identity shift. You now are a Lyme-y.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you, and what are you now doing to deal with this new identity that you have as someone who's suffering from Lyme disease and various what we are now calling co-infections?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. These identity shifts are exhausting. No, my reality now is 100% revolves around my Lyme. And I say that in the best and the worst way possible, for sure, because I know that that is something I never escape currently.
But I want you to walk back now to your Lyme diagnosis. You don't know anything about Lyme disease. You don't know anything about ticks. Dr. Chad, who is now this wonderful new person in your life, who is coincidentally from Connecticut and had Lyme disease, now helps you to get to a diagnosis. But you don't know anything about it, right? You just have this now diagnosis of some strange East Coast disease that's now being diagnosed for you by this strange East Coast doctor.
Yeah.
And now, so what does that mean to you initially, and how does that begin to change and become your new identity?
Yeah, so when I was diagnosed with Lyme, I had absolutely zero knowledge of it. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't understand the severity of it. I didn't understand that it wasn't, you try and explain Lyme to anyone, and it's very difficult because it's so multifaceted, and it presents in such different ways in different people according to their immune system, their genetics. So getting a Lyme diagnosis is very confusing.
Okay, so let's stay with that. Before, I don't want to run too far ahead.
Yeah.
So right now,
I get excited.
I know, and I think our listeners are going to be really excited to hear this piece of your story. But I want to stay with now your initial diagnosis. So, are you afraid? Are you excited? Do you think, hey, I'm now going to be able to do what I always did with all of my other injuries? I now have I have a healing path. I have a diagnosis. I'll pursue this healing path. My body's never betrayed me before. Now I'm going to fix this. Is that what your thoughts were, or did you have other thoughts?
I had a multitude of thoughts. So yes, I was really excited to know that there was a reason why I was experiencing so many health issues. I was really excited to know that, I wasn't just going to be experiencing, I got like mercury poisoning and fungal dysbiosis and SIBO, all of these very obscure, confusing health issues. I was excited to know that there was an underlying cause and that underlying cause could be addressed. So in my head, I now had a new goal. My new goal was I'm going to fix my Lyme disease. Did I understand that it was the complexity of that when I was diagnosed. Absolutely not. To
So
me, it
how,
was something I was going to be able to have an endpoint that would be fixed quickly.
and how did you come to understand that this was not something you were going to be able to resolve quickly? And what impact did that have on you personally, socially, professionally? Talk to us about all of the changes that occurred in both you from the standpoint of you now identifying yourself as a different kind of person, and what impact that was having on every aspect of your life.
Yeah, and this is still a journey that is very much so unfolding as currently, and I'm still in the midst of it. Absolutely. But my fatigue started to get to the point where I really was not able to have the life that I kept trying to keep up with, at least over the last 5 years. It was an uphill battle to stay social and active and be this high performing individual, which I still am in many regards, but my life had to do a complete 180. And that was due to the fact that I now had such severe fatigue every single day that there was absolutely no way I could continue to keep up with the life that I once had. And that itself is obviously mentally challenging for anyone. Yeah.
Now, but Athena, you were losing that life as time went on, right? You went from being this high performer who was at the peak of her career, who starts to get sick, and little by little, you're losing touch with your athletic circle and the friends you had in that circle. And you were not able to engage in a lot of the kinds of social activities you did, even with your own family. Your dad is still a high-level skier, despite being a senior citizen. So you're now losing little by little all of the things that made you, right? And now you've now pivoted your career, and you went from a career as a professional athlete to now a career as a professional realtor. And you've talked to us a little bit about that, and I do want to explore that in more detail. But you're also unable to do all of the little things that you've always done in life, right? You really can't go out, and you really can't do all of the kinds of things you had done before. Talk about that and what impact that's had on you.
Man, yeah, it's been extremely difficult, and it continues to be, because I like to think of, I have a very finite amount of energy on any given day. So if I continue to create very lofty goals for myself in the world of business, and generally, I do not have very much energy on any given day to even get close to all of the things done that I want to in my business world, let alone have energy left over to expend on being a social young adult. So for me, going from even as I retired out of skiing, I was still very, very active. I ran 20 to 30 miles a week. And I was a boxer, and I did yoga multiple times a week. So I've slowly watched that fade away to the point where now I'm lucky if, one day or 2 days a week, I have the energy to get a really good workout in, let alone most days it's hard for a 15-20 minute walk to get in. So my body has just completely done a 180 in terms of what I'm able to get done in every day. And that's mentally challenging.
So now when you got your Lyme diagnosis, you believed you were going to be able to take some medication, get better, and go back to the life you had been living before, right?
Yeah, I did.
So what medication did you take?
One day.
All right. So what medication did you take?
Yeah.
And how did that work or not work for you?
Yeah. So I started last summer, 2019, on disulfiram. And disulfiram, for those aware of it, is innovative and exciting, but there's still a lot of unknowns for sure. It is an abuse. So it is what they have treated alcoholism with for decades. And it's now being used to treat Lyme, which is incredible. But it was really, really, really difficult for me to tolerate. So I started off, I have an incredible Lyme literate doctor here in Denver, Dr. Dan Kinlinder. I always pronounce that wrong. He's an extremely empathetic and gentle and wonderful human. And he introduced me to this drug disulfiram, and we started off very, very, very slowly. And I took it for about 6 months, and unfortunately did not have any success and kept having a lot of issues with being able to tolerate the medication, with my body's reaction to the medication, and not actually experiencing any relief from, or any getting better. We found out now that that's actually because I've had parasites in my gut the whole time that have been eating that medication. So I'm not currently on anything for Lyme because I'm being treated for the parasites in my gut. So I thought that it was going to be 9 to 12 months of medication and then I would be fixed. And I'm now over a year in, and I really haven't even begun my Lyme treatment again.
Well, I don't want you to be so hard on yourself, because I'm sure the parasites are a part of your Lyme treatment. Yeah. And, Lyme disease, unfortunately, is, I think, misunderstood as a disease that's caused by one bacteria, which we know is not true.
Yeah.
So let's talk about disulfiram and why you took it, how you took it, and what the impacts were that it had on your body. You said you didn't tolerate it, but I'd like you to sort of put some meat on that bone. What did that mean you couldn't tolerate it?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, Lyme isn't just one bacteria, and there are so many different bacteria that we're dealing with and different infections that one tick is a tick is a host. So it is a host to many different infections. So
it can be up to 200.
Yeah, exactly. So being able to even wrap my own head around that has been, let alone describe that or explain that, yes, I have Lyme, and that encompasses parasite, and that encompasses so many different elements. It's really hard. It's something that I'm still trying to understand. And I think I'm really grateful for podcasts like this and resources that are making it more digestible and understandable and accessible, because it is something so complex and hard to understand. And I don't quite understand how so many different things have been brought to light in my life through Lyme. But yeah, so disulfiram, I became familiar with the term Herxheimer reaction, which any Limey knows, but it was something that I had no idea what that was. So I started taking, and this was something that my Lyme doctor, has been extremely informative and knowledgeable. So it's something that was being introduced to me as I was going through it. It's which was wonderful. But I would take the medicine. I started off, so a typical, if you were taking disulfiram for alcoholism, it would be two pills a day, and I think it's what are the milligrams? Like 200 per pill. And I started off on a quarter of one pill every 4 days. And the day after I took that quarter pill into the day after that, I was couch bound. So extreme joint pain, extreme muscle fatigue, exhaustion, and nausea. And a Herxheimer reaction is basically, the die-off of something in your body, an infection dying off, and you're basically like experiencing the flu. So I would take a quarter of a dose and I would pretty much feel like I had the flu. And then I'd feel pretty good for a day. And then I take my next dose and then I feel like I had the flu. And then every 2 weeks, we would increase that dosage. So I would go from a quarter every 4 days to a quarter every 3 days to a quarter every 2 days to a quarter every day. And I got up to a quarter every day and was tolerating it. Oh, sorry, decline. And I was tolerating it pretty well. But at that point, but my muscle pain and my joint pain started to accelerate to the point where it was, maybe we need to take a break so that we can get the inflammation down in your body. And that's when we started to realize that there was, a multitude of other issues that I was experiencing that were causing the inflammation to be much more severe than it should have been from disulfiram. Yeah.
So we've had many guests on this podcast who have described Lyme disease as an onion. They use the onion metaphor, and you have to sort of get through one level of the onion before you can get to the next level of the onion until you can get to the next level of the onion. And
that's a metaphor.
Yeah, isn't it? And clearly, when you use the medication that you were using at that moment, perhaps you were not at an appropriate level of your unpeeled onion to properly benefit from disulfiram. And I do want to share with you and share with our listeners that we actually did an interview with Dr. Richard Horowitz, where and we entitled that podcast episode "Has Horowitz Cured Lyme?", where he discussed his use of disulfiram and the positive impacts that it was having. What happened subsequent to the podcast was Dr. Horowitz was very aggressive about pointing out that disulfiram is a successful protocol, at least in his practice, at curing Lyme for people who only have the one bacteria that we traditionally define as Lyme disease, right? Yeah. Borrelia burgdorferi. If you had co-infections, this is not necessarily as successful as it would be if not. So Dr. Horowitz shared with us that he believed he cured his wife's Lyme disease, but only because she only had a single bacteria.
Yeah.
So,
and that's something that we've, I definitely, my doctor and I follow Dr. Horowitz very closely. And that's something that we have since been attuned to. So I'm currently now slowly starting to treat Bartonella. So we're going to start working on what we call the quote unquote co-infections. Whether that's the right terminology or not, I'm not sure. But I believe disulfiram as a monotherapy, they are finding is not what to do. So we're going to slowly start chipping away at the quote unquote co-infections. Like I have Bartonella and babesiosis or babesia, and we're going to be working on those first. And I believe that getting those at bay, because I do experience really horrible symptoms that we attribute to those two co-infections, will allow me to then treat the Lyme itself.
And I think you're giving us a really good example of why we really need to define Lyme disease as a multi-germ infection rather than a single bacteria causing an infection, because it makes it confusing for those of you who are trying to heal from this. And I think it makes it confusing for the medical community generally, that you need to have a diversity of diagnostic tools and a diversity of treatment tools just for the different types of bacteria, viruses, and protozoa that you're going to have to take care of. So for example, you have babesia, which is a form or it has been likened to malaria. And in most cases, doctors are treating that with anti-malarial drugs, not with traditional antibiotics. Or less than traditional antibiotics, which is why we have, beautiful people like Dr. Horowitz who are doing really creative things with medications that have not been used in this arena. But because it's a multi-germ infection, you have to treat it differently than if you had a single bacteria that was causing the infection, which is why you've been failed to this point, despite being lucky enough to have a beautiful man in your life who could help you get a diagnosis. And and to have the full scope of the diagnosis. So you've tried one form of antibiotics and it hasn't helped you. What other treatments have you done, and what has been helpful during the course of the time that you've been doing these treatments?
Absolutely. So we definitely take a functional approach and a holistic approach to my health. And I notice significantly when I am doing well because I'm following this approach. When I'm not doing well, it's because I have derailed from this. So, really understanding the foods that cause inflammation in my body. So eating really clean, avoiding gluten and dairy and inflammatory agents, alcohol, obviously, taking a wide variety of supplements. Magnesium helps my muscle pain significantly. Vitamin B with energy. Sam, I think I take 32 supplements a day. Honestly, I'm very, very. Dr. Jill Carnahan. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her. She's a functional medicine guru out here in Colorado, and someone I follow very closely. Works with my Lyme doctor, with Dr. Chad, with Dr. Horowitz, and understanding a holistic approach to just reducing any toxic burden in the body that we possibly can, so that I can focus, get the inflammation down and focus on fighting the multitude of symptoms that Lyme has caused. Getting my body, making sure I'm doing infrared saunas have been extremely helpful for me. Epsom salt baths, Alka-Seltzer Gold, understanding when my body is starting to show symptoms of what I call a flare-up, and trying to mitigate those as quickly as I can using the tools that I have. Unfortunately, right now, I'm kind of experiencing so many different toxic burden issues in my body that I'm having a hard time keeping them at bay. But I know I'm starting to build a really wonderful tool belt of what do I do when this happens. And those are just some of the things that have been successful. And I'm still actively learning and searching and trying to connect with communities that have are experiencing these things as well and have found success. So it's a constant search for knowledge, really.
Well, it sounds to me like you're also going back to your athletic roots, where you're building a whole team of doctors that you're working with as well. So your tool belt is developing with different techniques and tools that you're using to help you deal with your flare-ups or your herxing. And then you also have a whole team of doctors that you're having work together so that you can collectively come to a place where your healing journey can be short-circuited.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Honestly, it's really recently, I finally feel like I have this panel of doctors and advocates that are working together to help me get better. Because the last 2 months, just to be completely honest, have been, my body's gotten to the point where I'm not able to keep pushing myself through. I mean, I experience so much pain. I always say, my tolerance for pain is really, really high because I've experienced a lot of injury in my past. So for my pain tolerance is pretty much has gotten to its max. And, from EMF sensitivity, like touching my phone or my computer towards, after 3 p.m., it feels like I'm being tasered. I've got burn marks on my hands from using technology, actual burns on my hands. They get so swollen by the end of the day that I can't bend my fingers. My thyroid doesn't work anymore. I've been passing worms out of my gut. Like the list goes on and on. But I've got this incredible team of doctors that are advocating for me and working together to help me understand the entire picture so that I'm able to create a comprehensive plan that's not just a single monotherapy treating, Lyme or Babesia or Bartonella. I've got a team helping me to build a cohesive picture of what's going on inside my body that's very complicated and hard for I think anyone to understand. And I'm sure you, speaking with so many different Lymies, having so many different experiences, it's really, really hard to wrap your mind, especially when you're in, my brain fog and my ability to completely process anything, let alone one of the most complicated diseases you could ever imagine, it's really confusing, and it can feel you get lost in it. And it's definitely been something that I've felt really lost in. And I'm really grateful to have doctors working together now. And we're trying to figure out what the best therapies are and what the most comprehensive for attacking such a multitude of issues. So I'm really lucky in that manner. But, I also realize that I'm in a fortunate position and that, I couldn't imagine going through this without these people.
Well, and I appreciate your humility, but I think you have to give yourself a little bit more credit than you're giving yourself for, because I think it's a wonderful accomplishment that you've been able to assemble a team. A team very much like the team that you had in the past. And that really is a credit to you. These people didn't all find each other. You put them together and you built a team to help you have your group of Avengers to help you to go through this fight. And I admire you for that. And I think that's a really important hack that we have to share with our listeners, that you have to advocate for yourself and you have to build your team and you have to build your toolbox, because if you build your toolbox and you build your team, you are going to have a substantially greater likelihood of achieving that outcome. So despite your humility, I have to give you all the credit for that accomplishment.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And, something that one of my doctors told me was to use, living in 2020, we have access to information, which is incredible. So having, oftentimes it can be really hard to understand what Lyme is and how it exhibits in anyone's day-to-day life. And I think connecting with community of people that are going through it is the way to get through it. And that's something that I've only done recently, because if you're trying to describe what you're going through to someone that hasn't necessarily been there or isn't literate in the topic, it feels maddening and you can feel crazy. And it's, there are so many days and so many times where I feel like I'm losing it because it's so hard to describe what my body is experiencing. But if you go on Facebook and connect with Lyme groups, or if you listen to these podcasts, you start to realize that there is a community out there, and then you can connect with people that are experiencing things similar to yours and find out what they're having success with, what they're not having success with, or just be able to vent, have a soundboard of people that are going through something similar, and knowing that you're not alone and you're not crazy, because it can feel, there are days when I'm like, am I losing my mind, or do I really feel this horrible? Because it's so hard to wrap your mind around the fact that your body really feels that bad at any given time. So having community and building community has been absolutely crucial in me understanding my own diagnosis, my own struggles, and being able to kind of help see a light and guide my way through that. I'm really grateful for technology.
So Athena, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that with you. And again, I appreciate your humility, but we also have to give you some credit for the transformation that you've made, because the technology is only helpful if there's content available, if there are people who are available, if there are people who are sharing their journey. And we found you because you've become one of those people who is sharing her journey and her experiences. And tell us how you went from being this person who is very, very sick, and going through the process of assembling her own medical team and building her own health toolbox, to now finding the time and the energy to reach out to other Lymies and help them through their journey.
Oh man. So again, I'm going to go back to my background as an athlete, and the ability to create a goal and then create actionable steps towards that goal. So for me, when I was an athlete, when I was a skier, if I wanted to learn a new trick, I would visualize it in my head. I would go get strong enough that I knew that my body could do it. And then I would create a plan of attack. And it's been the same thing for me in my business and with Lyme disease, which is something I'm really just starting to grow into. And I'm really excited to see where it blossoms, because when I get my mind on something, it's kind of, I have an addictive personality. I'm addicted to accomplishing goals and achievements. And when I found out that I had Lyme, over the past, I'd say just 6 months, I've been able to get to a place in my own healing where I'm ready to connect with other people and where I'm ready to be an advocate and be an advocate for not only myself, but for other people that, you know, are dealing with Lyme or don't even know about Lyme. So it's definitely taken some time for me to be able to articulate what I'm experiencing and be an advocate for it. And I think that's important for anyone going through an illness or any sort of issue, is to give yourself time to really wrap your head around it before going out and trying to help other people with it. But for me, now that I understand Lyme and I understand that everything I've been going through is something that other people are experiencing, have experienced, will experience, it's a duty and an honor and something I will do for the rest of my life in trying to be an advocate for people that were and are experiencing what I'm experiencing, because it is so hard. And I really truly feel, you know, feel for people that are going through this, because I know that I'm a very tough person, and and this is, it's a struggle. Absolutely. So if I can help anyone like other people are helping me, then that's, you know, then I'm doing something right.
Well, Athena, I want to thank you for first taking time out of your life to join our podcast and share so much of your beautiful story with our listeners. But I also want to thank you for becoming the Lyme superhero that you've become, because a hero is not somebody who just has special talents. A hero is somebody who uses their special talents to help someone else. And you are doing that in your community, even though you're new to the community. And I want to thank you for using all of your gifts and talents to helping the folks in the Lyme disease community.
No, and I want to thank you guys, honestly. When you first reached out, I almost had one of those butterfly moments, and I was like, really? Someone wants to talk to me about about this? That's, you know, it's a true honor. And I really, really appreciate you guys really dedicating your lives to awareness and to creating a platform for us to share our experiences, because this is the way that we're going to be able to help each other get through Lyme disease, and to help the broader community and world as a whole understand just how completely insane this disease is.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with Athena Brownson. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Athena Brownson, please visit her Instagram page at Athena Brownson Realtor. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of the post. Third, we here at Tick Bootcamp have created a Tick Bite Blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at www.tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. We would appreciate it if you would contact us with any suggestions you have for improvements. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, or Spotify to get the automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, we thank you, our listeners, for your comments on our past podcast episodes. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on iTunes, on Instagram, or on our website. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews we get. Thank you for listening.